Pitch Up seemed quite appealing. New businesses, new ideas, new people.
It's really putting the message out there to entrepreneurs that farmers are open for these ideas, really.
Disrupting, looking at things afresh and not assuming they have to be done in sort of a way that they've been done conventionally for years.
You can do the same things, just do them differently. Find a different way to reach the end goal, but achieving more than one output.
We've had a shift on the farm in our mindset from a reductionist mindset, from reducing costs, getting down to the minimum, to this one of abundance and saying, right, there's an abundance of opportunities, let's go at them.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
Hello and welcome to Farming Focus, the podcast for South West farmers, brought to you by Cornish Mutual. I'm your host, Peter Green. Following our episode on the Oxford Farming Conference report, we're returning today to an episode about enterprise stacking to encourage listeners to think outside the box as to how you might be able to innovate your business. Enterprise stacking is a term you'll be hearing more and more as farms look for ways to build resilience, add value to their land, and bring in new income streams without necessarily changing what they produce. I'm joined in this episode by Tim May, Managing Director of Kingsclere Estates, who farms 1,000 hectares in Hampshire and is the co-founder of Pitch Up, a scheme connecting farms with entrepreneurs looking for space to grow their businesses. I'm also joined by Dave Oates, 7th generation at Rasuic Organic Farm on Cornwall's Lizard Peninsula, author of a forthcoming Nuffield farming study on enterprise stacking and one of Tim's Pitch Up partner farms. Together, they'll explain what enterprise stacking actually looks like in practice, from share farming agreements to spotting the unused corners of your farm that could become someone else's big idea. Whether you're thinking about diversification for the first time or looking to build on what you've already started, there's plenty here to take away. And as we're increasingly looking for ways to develop our farm businesses, enterprise stacking may be something that you'd consider. Let's get into it.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
Tim and Dave, I am delighted to have you both on the podcast. Tim, we'll start with you. Welcome. Can you start by introducing yourself and your business, please?
Hi there. Yeah, I'm Tim May, and I farm up in Hampshire, as you said, and I'm fourth generation up here. We farm 1,000 hectares organically, mixed between dairy and crops mainly.
Dave, hello and welcome. Can you just tell us a bit about you and your business, please?
Yeah, hello. I'm Dave Oates. I'm again a long generation on our farm. We're organic, beef, sheep, lots of diversification projects, and always open to ideas, I guess.
Great stuff, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that later on. So, regular listeners may recall that in episode 4 of this series of Farming Focus, we had Hugo Ellis and Jim Bliss on, and they covered everything you need to know about how to implement rewilding on your farm and circular farming, which led on to mention of Pitch Up. Tim, can you tell us about Pitch Up and how the concept began?
Yeah, sure. So, a bit like Dave, I'm a Nuffield scholar, and I did a scholarship in 2011, and as part of that, I kind of reassessed how we were farming and using our land. Realised really that to improve our productivity, our output on the land, pursuing this sort of monocrop dogma wasn't really the way that we were going to be able to achieve that. So I realised we need to increase the amount of diversity on our farm and the amount of diversity of activities going on the land. And wasn't really sure how to go about that. So I'd seen this farm in America called Polyface, where they do, that's where I guess this term of enterprise stacking came from, where they integrated lots of activities in together and tried to use each other's waste streams and build a bigger, more productive sort of farming system, and really liked that. And thought, well, that's what we need to try and implement back at home. That kind of led us to bringing grass back into our rotation, adding a lot more diversity. And then as we started going down that line, we realised that it wasn't really a thing that we could do in-house particularly. So we needed to get more people involved in the farm, and kind of realised that these people, they weren't going to be employed type people. They're going to have to be more sort of partnership type people, because there was no way that we could lead all these sort of different ideas we wanted to have on the farm ourselves. A lot of them are fairly disruptive. They're fairly, you can't go off the shelf and say, right, let's set this new enterprise up, because no one really knows, how that works, what it's going to be. So it's a bit more of a looking for more entrepreneurial type people.
Quite experimental.
Yeah, Yeah, experimental and disruptive, I guess, is a really, for me, I think is a really more attractive word I like to use, because we're kind of trying to disrupt the norms. So, like with our dairy, it being mobile, not needing planning permission, not needing slurry lagoons, not needing any of this sort of stuff. So that needs a sort of more entrepreneurial mindset. So to attract those, we kind of need people to come with their own ideas that have got their own enthusiasm to run it, as opposed to us saying, right, you need to come and put this enterprise on our land. So that then led to say, well, okay, if that's what we need to do, and we weren't really very prescriptive about the sorts of activities we need to have. We just know we need to have more activities going on.
Yeah.
So that kind of led to saying, well, how do we attract those people? We set a website up that was kind of okay, but it kind of hodgepodge of people applying to us. So then we went back and said, well, how do we get more people? How do we attract those people? So then we said, well, let's target all that activity into a month. So that was November, and we called that Pitch Up. And then other people in the farmer community said, we really like what you're doing. Can we steal your idea? And I said, well, why steal it? Why don't we work together? So that was the first farm up in Scotland, Balcaskey. And then we said, actually, well, this is kind of working for others. Let's spread this out to more farms.
So I'm hearing diversity. So we're not just thinking about it as in getting diversity into our soil. We're not even thinking about it as in just diversity of operations that we're carrying out. You're talking about diversity of people, of ways of thinking, and bringing them onto the farm. You spoke about disruptors as well. I find that really interesting. So in my head, I'm visualizing a change in farming from going from sort of farming in 2D, where I'm looking after what's in my fields and that's where I'm focusing, to farming in 3D, thinking, well, what else can we fit on this farm? What else can work with us and can add to it? And I think the next question for me is, how does it actually work in practice? How do you structure agreements between landowners and entrepreneurs? What makes a successful partnership? Maybe give us some examples, please.
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question, because we haven't really got definite answers to how that all works, because we've got these ambitions, but they're not overly there in practice. So what works at the moment is the agreements we've got, we're using a share farm agreement. So we're working where we have involvement as a business. We like to think about a minimum of sort of 30% involvement, financial involvement in the organisation works well, because if we had less than that, then we don't really have enough skin in the game to actually keep us focused. So we think like that sort of level of involvement is useful. The share farming model works because it helps to take some of the risk away, some of the upfront sort of charges away from the new entrant. So that kind of works well. But it's really quite bespoke as to where they are in that business sort of innovation cycle. So you've got that sort of innovation R&D, then you go into a growth phase, into a maturity phase, and sort of eventually, things end. And embracing that cycle is really important.
So it sounds like it's not without its challenges, from making sure that because there is no one size fits all. So it's about looking at every situation and judging it on its merits. Dave, can I come to you? How did you get involved with Pitch Up?
Yeah, good question. I was just trying to remember as Tim was speaking, and I'm not actually sure how it came about. I think it was just a mutual conversation, and someone said, "Oh, you'd be good for this, Dave, and your farm. You got a lot of businesses and different ideas." And back to what Tim said about disrupting and doing things differently. My dad's got a saying: "If you're doing it the same as everyone else, you're doing it wrong." And that's how we very much run our business and our farm, and always looking for new things. And I guess Pitch Up seemed quite appealing. New businesses, new ideas, new people, and it all just fits with us. We had a bit more of a conventional landlord tenant set up with various different businesses over the years, and some very formal, some very informal. And as Tim said, it's just kind of see how things grow, just see if an opportunity arises. So long as you've got enough reward in it, it's worth putting effort into, but balancing that with we've got this space, this opportunity, someone else can take it forward.
So what are your hopes for developing it on the farm? And I guess there's another question that's come into my head. How do you know when you've got too many disruptors on your farm? Because we're talking about disruptors in a very positive sense, people who think differently, do things differently, and that's what you've just articulated with that wonderful quote from your dad. But where is this going to go, and how do you see it developing?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, because you don't know what ideas other people are going to come forward, and it's very difficult Yeah, I've got 100 different businesses ideas that people could run off of our farm, but it's finding people, they've got to come with their own ideas and their own passions, because you can't tell someone to run their own business. They've got to be passionate about it. And, and then you have the conversations and you go through well, actually, what sort of income do you want to get? How much product are you going to have to sell? What are your setup costs? What are your fixed costs? And then you can look at it from that experience. And then, yeah, I don't know. It's a very difficult one because there is such a wide variety of business, and not just agricultural, but a whole array of different industries which actually could be running off of farms. I just see a lot of opportunity.
Fantastic. So, Tim, what are the wider plans for Pitch Up? Will you be taking on more farmers so there are more sort of these hubs like Dave's farm across the country?
Yeah, it's quite a tentative answer because I don't really know. It's kind of it got to 6 farms by mistake, really. And so I can imagine that we could probably, there's no reason why we couldn't take this on for more and more farms and more people could grow. The level of support and what we're trying to do is we're really an advertising campaign, saying to people, look, here's an opportunity for you to approach these farmers with your ideas. Pitch Up's worked well for us, and having more farmers work well for us because it's helped us get more money to make our advertising campaign bigger, so that we can get penetration into markets where we wouldn't get out of our little sort of echo chamber. Instead of talking just on podcasts to other farmers like we're doing today, but try and get into cities and into areas where other entrepreneurs might be. So by getting more farmers involved, we can then use that money to get penetration into other industries. But there's balancing that with having so many farmers and not enough people come to us, and actually, make it worth the while of the farmers actually investing in the advertising campaign.
Right. So there has to be a balance. That's
where that nuance is, yeah. And I don't really know where the line is, but I kind of see. So historically, there's this thing called the Michaelmas Fair. And what would happen on that one day of the year is all the people that were looking for new jobs or for looking employment would almost stand in a line in their local village fair, and they would go along. Michaelmas and November happen to be fairly closely aligned, and so I kind of think, well, actually, we're kind of creating a modern version of that Michaelmas Fair eventually, and maybe if we make that what Pitch Up was all about, that there's a time in the year that farmers are open to suggestion, and there's then the people that have got the new ideas can go and talk to their local farmers. That could work that way, and that could be enough. But yeah, it's really putting the message out there to entrepreneurs that farmers are open for these ideas, really.
Brilliant. And I love that imagery of the Michaelmas Fair. You've got the farrier with his horseshoes, you've got the thatcher with his thatching tools, and I guess you've got the shepherd with his crook and his dog that, really sort of brings that to life. But obviously, you talk about November being sort of the real the push to get new ideas in. We're obviously later in the sort of the cycle of the year when we're recording this and when this is going out. But how can listeners, whether they're farmers or non-farmers, because we have both on the Farming Focus podcast, how can they get in touch? Should they wait until next year, or what would the process be?
No, not at all. The website was open the whole time. So, and we're really keen that people do approach us with ideas and approach the farms on the Pitch Up website, the around the country, with our ideas. So it is open all year, but we focused on a particular month so that we've actually got a product to market. So it's really because it's a marketing campaign, we've got to have something to talk about, and so we need a call to action. Exactly. So if we were to say just come whenever and talk about it whenever, we wouldn't really have a thing to market. So that's why November is really important. But what it's done, it's raised awareness of these other farms, of Dave, of the farms all around the place, that they are open to business.
Brilliant. Lovely job. So Dave, coming to you, we'll broaden the conversation a little bit. You've recently begun your Nuffield studies into the topic of stacking land uses for business and environmental sustainability. For listeners who maybe aren't familiar, what is enterprise stacking? Tim talked a little bit about that term earlier, and we talked about maybe sort of farming in 3D, but what is it and how does it differ from just plain straightforward diversification?
Yeah, I guess the title and stacking is more to challenge farmers and challenge people within the industry to think outside of just producing commodity products or food. Land can be used in so many different ways, and I think as farmers, especially outside of agriculture, a lot of my friends are outside of agriculture and challenge me on the way and challenge other people on the way that they manage their land. I think farming is very much in an echo chamber, and a lot of farmers find that their social lives are within their bubble and in a remit of we need to produce more food or we need to do more for the environment, but don't realize there's 1,000 other things they could be doing. And my approach is, in line with the whole pitch up thing, is finding different ways to utilize what we've got, and making sure that it's the right thing to do for the future.
Okay. And Tim, what are your thoughts on what Dave said, and what are your thoughts on the comparison between putting different enterprises on your farm versus the diversification that we are so often encouraged to do as farmers?
Yeah, so that's two questions. The first one, we've had a shift on the farm in our mindset from a reductionist mindset, from reducing costs, getting down to the minimum, to this one of abundance and saying, right, there's an abundance of opportunities, let's go at them. If we embrace this abundance, we can then actually improve our biological diversity by having an abundance of capitalist sort of actions going on our farm that we can actually add value. We can add value to our woodlands, add value to our stuff. And once we add value to them, then we can get these things up and running, and we can then, get those ecosystems working. And that's a really important part of where we're trying to go. So enterprise stacking versus just doing more activities. I suppose the bit of the essence is that they're more integrated within enterprise stacking. The example that's used commonly would be having a flock of chickens chase a herd of cows around a field, and that's like a really talking about the symbiosis between those two activities sort of starts that ball rolling. But it's not to say this is the only form of enterprise stacking. So if you've got chickens chasing a herd of cows, the chickens are doing their natural thing as scraping, and they scrape away at the dung. And the reason they scrape away at the dung is because the dung's full of bugs, and those bugs provide the protein. So then the chickens get cheaper protein in their system. But in the process of doing that scraping, they're exposing the dung to sunlight, which gets better pasture hygiene, etc. Spreads the dung, so you didn't get those hot spots of fertility in the area. The chickens are also bringing in extra fertility because they're only getting a maximum of 15% of their diet from the protein in the cow pat. So that extra fertility then produces more fertility for the cows to come and eat. So that's like an idea of this enterprise stacking that's integrated.
So it's it's a virtuous circle.
Yeah. Whereas you could have a chicken farm and a dairy farm or farm working side by side, and then you get massive fertility hotspots in both areas. So then they're not doing that integration.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
One thing I'm really interested in is mindset and openness to change in farming. Does stacking require, or this activities like pitch up, do they require a different mindset from all the different stakeholders, from the landowner, the farmer, the people coming in, compared to more traditional models?
So our mobile dairy, the roaming dairy that we run, whenever we have traditional dairy farmers come to the farm, they're like, why is there just not a concrete pad and the cows walk to you? I couldn't do this. I'd never do this. This is stupid. But then when we get a first generation farmer come and run it, he's like, why would people put cows on concrete and make their cows walk back to the yard all the time? It's just so there's
disruption, isn't it?
It completely is. Yeah.
Just look at things a different way. Start from the bottom. Work out re-engineer processes.
And kind of want it. So the reason that Ollie could envisage it was because he wanted to set a farm up on the farm, and now he's like, well, I wouldn't be a non-mobile farmer. I'd be, because then I'd have to be fixed to a land area, and I'd have to subscribe to whatever my landlord wants. And if my kids married someone over there and they wanted to set a farm up over there, that if it was all a fixed land base, they'd have to sell the farm there and buy a farm there or whatever, and all that would be a blocker to moving around the place. Whereas Ollie now just says, well, okay, they want to set a farm up over there. They put the cow, the milking parlour on a shed and go over there, and
and we're talking about Ollie Chedji. So your business partner, I believe, in the mobile dairy. And I've heard him speak a couple of times about this, and listeners that are interested, especially in the mobile dairying enterprise, should go to YouTube and look at Nuffield Farming's video of Ollie giving his presentation. And I think he mentioned in that, and he mentioned it at Groundswell when I heard him speak last year, about if you turned Kingsclere upside down, anything that falls off, would be his. Nothing of his would be bolted to Kingsclere. He could take it all away. And that was really quite a liberating and interesting thought for me. So we talked there a little bit about mindset. And Dave, we've talked as well about this reductionist way of farming. How do we change the perception of farming from a sort of single output production to multi-output land use?
Yeah, I guess one of the things I'm looking at, as well as, as Tim was saying, putting the chickens with the cows and agricultural outputs, what I'm also looking is challenging outside of the industry. So how do we bring on, the social benefits, or an accountancy firm which has got nothing to do with agriculture, but they want to have somewhere nice to walk during their lunch break, as well as renewable energy. There's a lot of mainly negative, not all negative exposure about solar panels on land or wind turbines on land. And a lot of it's down to perceptions. And whilst I would never cover my farm in solar panels, it's in the conventional way. I am thinking, well, actually, is there a way this could work in, with different technology, or, things like vertical solar, which take up hardly any space, or integrating agroforestry and different types of wind turbine and just new technology. I think that's what I'm trying to focus my effort onto, is looking outside of the industry as well.
Yeah, really, well, like we just said earlier, disrupting, looking at things afresh, and not assuming they have to be done in sort of a way that they've been done conventionally for years.
You can do the same things, just do them differently. I think that's kind of, find a different way to reach the end goal, but achieving more than one output.
So there must be challenges with enterprise stacking. So, can enterprise stacking work for tenant farmers, for example, or does it require land ownership? Dave, what are your thoughts on that?
I actually think of myself more as a tenant farmer than I do, a landowner. And I'm 7th generation on my farm. And our family farm is about 120 acres, which is a perfectly viable farm, but not in beef and lamb production. If I wanted to make an income off my land, I could. I would have to do something different. But I wanted to follow that model, and I wanted to do more environmental work. So I actually rent 9/10 of my farm is rented. I'm looking at options, and I'm also looking at options for my children. So most farms, 1 child or 2 children would inherit, and then the farm would either be split, or one person would get more than the other, and some would end up with very little. So I'm thinking at it from a long-term approach for future generations, for me to give my children as an equal share, or a fair share. I need to look at other things, other outputs that I could pass on to my children without having to split up my farm, so that there's not an 8th or a 9th generation.
And there'll be a lot of people listening who might be thinking about similar things, or might be in similar positions. And actually, this is where an asset which might have a different valuation from another one could be seen as equal, because one of those assets, whilst it's worth less, might have more income bearing potential. But these are questions that we could get lost in the long grass of.
Absolutely, especially at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Tim, what are your takes on the question about having to own land versus being a tenant, and whether that can work?
Yeah, so Kingsclere Estates doesn't own any land at all. So we act as a tenant the whole time. So right. Yeah, it's AHA, Agricultural Holdings Act tenancy. So it's quite a traditional one. We kind of operate in a tenant environment, the share farming thing completely. And I don't see why there'd be any problem. All you're doing is trying to add extra business. So you do that. You could do that with a tenant quite happily. And because it's a share farm and the structures, it's not a partnership or anything else, and it doesn't actually get constituted as subletting. So, if you're going to get hung up over that, then it probably isn't going to work for you. So it is really that disruptive mindset is the important thing. Yeah.
No, understand that.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
So what advice, Tim, would you give to farmers who are interested in having a number of different enterprises on their farm?
So it's really about risk and risk management. And the first things we do, the first ways we start is to try these businesses out and look for businesses that don't really impact on your day-to-day running. So, like the first person that won pitch up was a company called Munch. They wanted to go around the hedgerows and harvest for sticks and for leaves and that sort of thing for their rabbit food business. Had absolutely no impact on my day-to-day business. It's fine. It's like Dave saying, in an accountancy firm that wants to set up on the side and not really impact on on his day-to-day farming, that's a no-brainer really. So it's those sort of things that aren't necessarily going to have a massive impact on you to start with. You get the confidence that these things can work, and then you can build that confidence up and make something bigger and better from there. So being really aware about risk, and you can do this in a risk averse way.
So Dave, we talked there about making sure that the different operations on farm are complementary. How do you make sure that that's the case when you're considering different enterprises to bring on the farm?
Yeah, a good question. It's kind of it's down to the people as much as the business. How much help do we need to give? Is it something simple as we've got a telehandler to help them unload lorries and they're happy to rent some space? Or is it someone that needs help to, structure their business, maybe apply for some funding or find markets for their food, which is going to take up a lot more of our time? And it's as much about the people as it is as the business, I think. It's about finding people that you can just work with and not get hung up on the legalities. If you're worried about the business structure at the point of starting up, you're probably not the right people to be working together. You've got to have an idea that you can make it work. And yeah, you need to have those discussions, but they're not going to be the make or break of a business.
Yeah, that's really interesting what you say. So we've got some tenants here on the farm, and 9 times out of 10, your initial gut feel is actually how that relationship will unfold. The ones that you're not quite sure about, sometimes are the ones that don't work, and the ones that you think, actually, this guy just gets what I'm trying to do, or I can really work with this person. It's so often the case that that's how things pan out. So I think that's a really important point about the people and gut feel. So just finally, what's the low-hanging fruit in this area, Dave, that could give a quick win in terms of enterprise stacking for farmers listening today?
I think look at what your farm's got to offer outside of your business. What land are you not using? For many people, that would be woodland, your hedgerows, your corners, or a small barn somewhere. What's actually making you money, and what could you do without? I think the legacy of the BPS scheme is that you get paid for every acre, and if you take out a little quarter of an acre, you'll lose £100 a year. Don't be afraid just to take something out of whatever schemes or contracts you're under and have a little bit of an experimental corner and see what you can do with it.
Tim, your thoughts on that? I mean, some great points raised by Dave, but what are your thoughts?
Sorry to be boring, but it's exactly the same. So many of these businesses, these startup, in that early phase of the cycle, need space and time. And if we can provide space and time, they need that space and time just to be able to scratch the itch and get on with it and try it.
And that goes back to what Dave was saying about those questions that you might ask someone who comes to you with an idea about what are your initial costs, what are your ongoing costs, and understanding what the fixed costs are and what the startup costs are.
Yeah, which is really understanding that where they are in that cycle. And if someone's really established, they don't need a partnership. They just need to rent a building off us. That's fine. And if they're right at the beginning, they can't afford anything, but they haven't got anything to pay us rent for, but they need some space to trial that thing out. So it really depends what I'm saying, where they are in that cycle.
Great. Thank you very much, gents.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
It's time now for our showstoppers, and the 2 points that really stood out for me from our conversation with Tim and Dave today were around disruption and risk. And the two aren't a million miles removed from one another. We heard about disruption in the context of Dave's father's quote, and he said, if you're doing something the same as everyone else, you're doing it wrong. And the idea here is around not changing what you do, not changing the output, not changing what you produce on your farm, but in thinking about how you do it. Can you look at the processes that you're undertaking in a different way, and can you re-engineer them or make them simpler or more straightforward for people to take on or do? And then we look at risk, and by involving disruption and disruptors in our business, we need to be taking some risks. But Tim spoke about the need to make sure there's not too much impact on our business as usual, on the day-to-day, on our operations. There mustn't be too much conflict. There needs to be just enough. So it's about balancing risk and disruption on our farms.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.
Well, that's it for today's episode rerun. A massive thank you again to Tim May and Dave Oates for sharing how they're building their own businesses by stacking enterprises on their farms and working with others to innovate their own local economies. If there's one thing to take from this conversation, it's that you don't need to reinvent your farm overnight. Start small and be open to the ideas other people can bring to your land. If you want to find out more about PitchUp, head to pitchupandgrow.com. Thank you for listening to Farming Focus, brought to you by Cornish Mutual. Please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Peter Green, and I'll see you next time when we'll be looking back on farmer Eddie Rickson's really powerful story and how he went from surviving to thriving.
Cornish Mutual, farming insurance experts.